I am really excited to welcome a range of people and experts from all around the world. I was going to toss up the number of countries we got represented. It's a pretty good range. We're going to hear from people very briefly. It's a series of very short presentations and discussion around the points. The idea is to give you a bit of a flavour of the different ways in which built environment relates to local conditions, climate, and society, and think about what that means for the future. So I do hope you enjoy what you're going to hear. I'm going to hand over to Rosie Paul, architect and director of Masons Inc. in India. And Rosie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And it's my pleasure to speak after Ibrahim. It was such an exciting presentation. And it's interesting because I have the same things to talk about. And it's nice to know that no matter where we're from, we still have the same solutions or the same suggestions to the common problem we're all facing as the world. Now, when we talk about lessons that we learn from the vernacular, I think they're quite evident, the lessons that are already present. When we talk about vernacular architecture, we already are talking about resilient buildings because they've lasted so many years. Of course, there are changes now because the climate is getting harsher, and there are innovations that we need to make to our existing knowledge systems. But it does not mean that we forget and look for new inventions, but we look into what we already have and innovate on them. So when we speak about vernacular, like Ibrahim said, I think the vernacular talks a lot about how we're connected to our climate and our culture. And not only that, our culture is also has a say on the livelihood, and the architecture of the place is depending on what they work on in that area. So some examples that I don't have the beautiful slides, but I hope I can explain them well enough that you may understand. So when we talk about how closely culture and climate are linked to the vernacular, I'd like to speak about an example from Kerala, where the vernacular houses have large verandas, which are stepped verandas. So Kerala is a place with very heavy rainfalls and prone to flooding. Earlier, occasional flooding, now flooding every year. So the idea of these stepped verandas was that there's enough of a level difference between the ground and the main house. So this veranda kind of acts as the area which could get flooded without really affecting the main structure. When it came to culture, the relevance of this was most of these houses were on riverbanks, and they acted as places of rest for weary travelers who were coming by boat to just rest for the evening and then carry on, without disturbing the people of the house. And even when we move further north to the east of India, we have a community near the Sundarbans where they are a fishing community. So each community had some natural ponds that they were looking after, and they got their fish from there. And their houses were built from the clay from those ponds. And those areas, there is a lot of bamboo that's available. And the main structure is made out of bamboo, and the infill material was this clay. And their idea of resilience is very different from what we imagine right now, because right now we're looking at something, permanent, something of permanence that is a cure-all for everything, that one material that has the answer to all the problems in the world. But for them, it was more of renewal. So every year they are prone to cyclonic storms, but how they handled it was they would let the storm pass, and the materials they needed to repair their houses were very local. So the intervention didn't cost them much to redo and repair the damages that the houses cost. And I think that's something that we really need to look into when we talk about resilience, because it is a problem that we are creating when we give them solutions with materials that do not exist in their environment. Another lesson that I'd like to talk about is something that Ibrahim also touched upon, is about how people-centric the vernacular was and is, and how inclusive it is. It included children, it included women, it included men, and it was a community affair to build something together. So of course, in urban areas that might be difficult because we've come away from that that feeling of being interdependent, and we're looking into being more independent. But in areas of rural landscapes, it is probably wrong to push this solution of independence on them when they are a community of interdependency. And that's something that we need to think of when we're looking at solutions in these climate sensitive areas. The last thing I'd like to touch upon is the importance of materials and the wealth of knowledge that the indigenous communities have on each of the materials that they use. Ibrahim showed us some pictures of natural additives that were being added in the houses in Bena. And it's interesting because there is the same kind of wealth of knowledge in India as well. And what is an additional thing that I found interesting was there is a transdisciplinary connection between these ingredients that were used. So again, talking about Kerala, the ingredients that were used in construction, these natural additives, very similar to the ones he spoke about, are also used in medicine, in Ayurveda, and in mural art. So this one ingredient that has answers to your health, to your building, to your food, you know, and it's something that we need to really look into, where when you look at the built environment, you're not looking at it as a unidimensional aspect or a unidimensional element. And probably the answer is, in this case at least, Ayurveda is still a thriving traditional practice. It's become very popular with the Western world, and there's still a lot happening over there, whereas the mural art and the architecture is in the revival phase. I mean, it's almost dying and we're trying to bring it back up. But one of the solutions we're looking at is to try and reconnect with the Ayurveda part of it, so we can get our materials probably from there, because it's the same materials, which would help us kind of give low carbon, more place adaptive solutions to the resilient buildings that we're trying to build for these communities. So I'd like to end with that, and thank you.